Welcome back to Powered by Play. I'm Drew, and I'm a professor of theater at Chapman University in Southern California.
I'm Avery, and I'm a theatrical scenic designer. Every month on this podcast, we explore what we play, how we play, and why we play.
We use a wide definition of play, from board games and video games to escape rooms and haunted mazes, from cat cafes to fantasy football, and much more.
We believe that play is powerful and that it shapes us. It's an opportunity to explore power dynamics, practice agency, and discover how to use play to change the status quo.
We, as individuals, feel fulfillment, learn, and connect through play. It powers us, and that's what makes it powerful.
Today, we are talking about collections. All over the world, people of all ages collect all sorts of things by seeking, acquiring, organizing, displaying, and maintaining items that they personally find interesting. We believe that collecting is a form of play, and we're here to investigate why it matters. So my first question of the day is, what do you collect or have you collected in the past?
That sounds like a great place to start. And I guess we can go back to childhood and talk about collecting Lego sets or small characters from stories and IPs that I really liked. I think that what was cool about Lego was that you could do anything with it. You could start by building what it told you to build, and then you could build something different or you could improve on it. And so I remember just absolutely loving what can I do with this and its flexibility. And then nowadays I collect prints and posters from places that I've traveled, or prints that are called retro futurist, that kind of style, like the old school Tomorrowland spaceship cities of the future, the 1960s vision of what the future was going to look like. And I also inherited a coin collection from my grandfather and decided that it would be cool to add to that. And so I kind of looked and saw, okay, what did he have and what did he not have? And then I slowly began to kind of fill in the blanks. And what's cool about coins, what I discovered was that they are a really solid record of what a country values in the moment that the coin is minted. Before we started putting presidents on our coins, we started with visions of liberty. What was liberty? And how was she personified? And we also started out with Native American representations. Probably the most famous is the so-called Indian head penny, but there are buffalo nickels and there are other images of Native Americans on coins. And then we moved to presidents, and now we're kind of into places or famous people. I have a quarter with the astronaut Sally Ride on the back. Obviously, she was absolutely fantastic, so I wanted to have the quarter with her. And so as you go through, you just kind of see how things change. And if you look at coins from other nations, you might see monarchs, or you might see great thinkers, or even representations of ideas like liberty that I was talking about before. With coins, it's been really interesting to see how did I pick up from where my grandfather left off. What about you, Avery?
I have always loved collecting stuffed animals or plushies. Since I was a kid, I would enjoy toys of all kind were one of the first things that I would enjoy collecting. I found pleasure in acquiring a variety of Barbies and My Little Ponies and Littlest Pet Shop creatures and just those little figurines of those animals. I don't know what it was, but it just drove that young little brain just like I want more.
Yeah.
But now most of the stuffed animals that I have a very specific taste in them. Whereas before, when I was younger, it would just be, regular animals and like Build-A-Bear. But now I am really into just creatures that have two dot eyes and a neutral expression. I don't know what it is, but when I see one and I have an instant connection with its expressionless face, I just feel like it belongs in my collection with me in my home. Like I have a couple squishmallows of that kind, and I have some other plushies from brands called Fluff Nest or Puff Pals, and they just I yeah, it's a very specific aesthetic to the point where I do mind if another person gives me a stuffed animal because if it doesn't fit in my aesthetic, I it just doesn't fit, and then I feel bad. Um, but there's also space limitations where I am forcing myself not to acquire anymore right now because I only have one shelf and one bed, and there's already a rotation of four massive plushies on my bed too. So can't have too many, unfortunately. But at least with coins, you can have as many as you want because they're not too big of a thing to store, right?
Yeah, they're small, they fit in a folder, and another great thing about coins is they last. It's very hard. I mean, obviously you can damage them, but it's much harder to damage coins than something like, say, a paperback book, or even sometimes a plushie that sometimes gets left out where a pet can get to it, and somehow that pet thinks that it is their collectible rather than their owner's collectible. I have seen that happen.
Yeah, my sister has a lot of she crochets a lot of plushies to sell them, or she used to sell them, but she also collects crochet plushies that she makes. She has them all in a glass case, whereas I don't have any of my stuff in a glass case because I don't have pets yet. But I know that if I ever get a pet, my first priority is protecting my rightful collection.
I'm sorry, those are my toys, not yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just when you described the cube, I just remembered I do have one other fun thing that I collect, and that is choose your own adventure books from my childhood, including one of my very favorite books was the first book, The Cave of Time, that was signed for me by Edward Packard, who is the creator of the series, and he wrote lots and lots of books. And the thing about Choose Your Own Adventure books is that they are numbered. And so I think it's tempting to say, okay, do I have a run of books 1 through 10 or 11 through 20? And do I have to? I know we're going to talk about a couple of other items further down in our outline that are going to have to do with, like, how do you sort them into I have this in this category, this in this category. But Avery, those numbers just sit there and taunt some people who are collectors, I think.
Absolutely. You reminded me that I did collect books as well. My Magic Treehouse collection, I think
Oh yeah.
I ended around 48 because that was the moment that I kind of outgrew them. But I think around that I had to decide between do I want to keep buying them even though I'm mentally aging out of them just for the nostalgia. And the day that I had to pack them up to donate them because I was a big adult at this point, I couldn't give them all away and I kept my four favorites. I think it was the Unicorn in New York one, the Dragon in Japan one, and two others, but those, oh man, what a satisfying endeavor that was. And I love books too. And it's extra fun to collect something that you love because there's that internal love for the object and the experience of it that itself that it gives you.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about when you turn from collecting physical objects to collecting digital objects. I don't know. I wonder if we are kind of moving forward from an age of collecting books to simply having books as digital media. For me, there is nothing like picking up a paperback that's light enough to read in bed and just relaxing with it and flipping the pages. There's something so tactile about it.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode on just reading or paper media of
Oh,
any
we
kind.
totally could. And
Yeah.
that Unicorn
So
in New York book, ah, Chef's Kiss, Avery. I remember that one. That was at the museum in New York, and
Yep.
Jack and Annie. Oh my gosh, that was a solid, solid story.
Yeah, I mean, Jack and Annie were collectors of their own kind.
Oh, they were. Oh, heck yeah, they were.
So, what have you researched this week about collections?
Well, I thought a lot about kind of the history and where things came from, and so I think that my knowledge of the idea of collecting and displaying starts sort of in the, I would say, the 1700s, 1600s, or 1700s, with the so-called age of exploration and the idea that explorers, so-called explorers, or people who went to visit other countries, would come back with some kind of a souvenir or an example of something that existed in the other place that they wanted to display. And so before museums, there were what were called cabinets of curiosities. And this is where we get the word curio from curiosity as an object that is interesting. And so there's this whole like fetishization and exoticization way of looking at this. But this is kind of where display came from, collection and display, demonstrating knowledge, demonstrating your personal reach. How far out could you travel? What kind of contacts do you have? And there's a creepiness factor to it, that it's connected to kind of an imperialist mindset. And we should note that in some of these displays, especially things like World's Fairs, people were considered collectible and put on display as well. So it was a time in which this pursuit, I think, really kicked off. And then, of course, as humanity sort of creeped back in, and we started to look at the human race as a fellowship or a brotherhood, sisterhood, then we still didn't lose, especially in the West, we still didn't lose our love of souvenirs. I have this great quote from Oscar Wilde, who said, "I find it harder and harder every day to live up to my blue china." And so the beauty of the pieces of the plates, the dishes that he had acquired from China as a British man, gave him this sort of, like you were talking about, aesthetic that he tried to bring into his own personal life. He wanted more than anything to be beautiful and fascinating. And so I think around a little later, sort of post World War II, when we really got into pop culture and we got into things like comic books or like G.I. Joe action figures or Barbie, kind of in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, maybe the groundwork had been laid by those earlier pursuits of look at what I have and look at what I am able to say about what I have. So that was what I was thinking about.
It makes a lot of sense that industrialization and mass production can definitely help kick off this phenomena of collecting that humans do. In relation to a lot of the mass-produced items that people like to collect, I'm just gonna list off a bunch that I found on Wikipedia because it kind of summarizes the whole thing.
Yeah,
Well,
let's see.
I learned what philumeny is, or philuminism, which is the collection of match-related items. Did you know about this?
No, I didn't.
Apparently, matchboxes, matchbox labels, matchbooks, match covers are a big thing that certain people really love to collect. And you mentioned books and comic books. Absolutely. There's prizes like cereal box prizes, which I don't think I ever had a cereal box have a prize in it. I only ever heard of it.
Yeah.
But there's also Beanie Babies, which I didn't realize was that big of a thing. Do you know more about Beanie Babies?
It was a big thing for a while, and I was there for a little bit. I had one little Beanie Baby tiger at one point, and then it somehow got lost along the way. But you had to not only have the little plushie, but you had to have the tag. It had a little heart, and the heart had a T and a Y on it. That was the company, and then it had the name of the Beanie Baby and a little bit about the Beanie Baby. And they sold little plastic protectors for the heart tags so that you wouldn't lose the value of your Beanie Baby.
Oh, right. Dude, that totally reminds me. I think I just had a memory of my sister and I at the mall in like a little toy store. And I think we opened up a tag of, I don't remember if it was a Beanie Baby or a similar toy, but we opened up the tag and we memorized the code and we went home and redeemed it or something for a game or something.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah. People also love to collect trading cards. Oh, card games like Pokemon were a huge part of my childhood. In my childhood, you were either a Yu-Gi-Oh kid or a Pokemon kid. I was a
Oh, yeah.
Pokemon kid, but I think my sister was a little bit more of a Yu-Gi-Oh kid. But then we both became Pokemon kids. Um, there's other trading cards related to sports or not related to sports. People like to collect clothing related things like buttons, handbags. I can and cannot believe that people collect designer handbags and designer sneakers, and there's people who have really big sneaker collections, patch
Oh, yeah.
collections, badges. Then we get to currency like coins and stamps, postcards. I actually collect postcards, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in terms of like traveling and stuff, but collecting things from all over like every country. Like it's easy to collect something when there is a numerical limit to it. Like there's only a certain amount of countries and thus the thrill of that is made a little bit more satisfying to try to complete it. And then literally anything that you can think of in relation to music, film, movies, and even with nature, I collected a lot of rocks or leaves as a kid or shells, just like the interesting ones. My partner definitely had a rock obsession as a kid. He told me when I was interviewing him for this podcast that he was so obsessed with trying to get rocks from books that he read about that one day he just walked up to his parents and like held open the book, pointed to like Brazil or something because apparently that's where you can find an amethyst. He was like, I want to go here. And they're like, oh, okay, so yeah, you just want to go just for a rock. And it was a really cute story. And then like toys, games, dolls are a whole thing. Like I mentioned the toys that I would play with, toys that other people yeah, I think and then there's also like things in your cupboard too, like you said, mugs, china, plates, anything. You could name anything and there's somebody out there who is collecting it to an intense degree.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if you remember, when you lived here in Orange, there were a whole bunch of antique shops. And going down the rabbit hole and seeing what people have collected and what they have for sale in those antique shops, that's kind of a journey in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe we should talk about the psychology. We did start off by saying, why do we collect? So maybe we should hit that a little bit. Here are a few things that I was thinking about. As a board game enthusiast, there is a division in the board game hobby between those who play, which is the vast majority of the hobby, and those who collect. And so the idea, for some of us, the idea that you would buy a board game to keep it on a shelf and never take it out of its box, just simply leave it there, is a little bit confusing. But there are many people who have one copy of a game that they play and one copy of a game that they collect and they display. A good example would be the game War of the Ring, which is a big battle game based on, of course, Lord of the Rings. And there have been versions of it that are a little bit stripped down, and so the figures are there and you can tell who they are. But then there have been collector's editions that have beautiful metallic figures and gorgeous dice and beautiful gilded cards and things like that. And it seems like they are catering to both audiences. So it also makes me wonder, is collection inextricably tied to display? If you collect something, are you almost undoubtedly going to display it so that you can see it and others can see it? For example, like a rock collection, for example, in a bowl on a table, or games or books in a cube, or a like one of those shelf things from IKEA that lots and lots and lots of people get to store their stuff. Is that part of you? You don't, if you collect something, you don't want it hidden away from the light of day. You want it out to be, as they say, a conversation piece. So that was kind of interesting. And then I also thought about the idea of, at some point, is collecting seen as a pathology? Do we see people, particularly characters? There are characters in horror movies, Avery, who are collecting victims or pieces of clothing, or I mean, creepy stuff, right? So there's almost a pathology associated with them. The character of the collector, Benicio del Toro's character from the MCU, collecting all these things just to keep them for himself, hoarding. So is there a pathological connection where sometimes collectors are seen as objectifying or greedy? Is there a, if there are, if they're part of a community that collects things, is there some kind of competition? Is there a drive to say, well, my board game collection is over 500 games? And then I think an outsider might say, well, how many of those games can you possibly play in a year? How long has it been since you played any of those games? And there's a saying in the board game community called your shelf of shame, which means games that you have bought, but you have not gotten to the table yet. And then I think the last thing for this sort of maybe negative look or pathological look is the idea of hoarding. So is hoarding collecting that starts with a purpose, but then the boundaries slip away? And so what's important is no longer curating and deciding what stays in, what goes away, but simply finding space for everything because nothing is going away. So that kind of struck me when I was thinking about the psychology.
Fascinating questions. I read an article from Dr. Shirley Mueller, who wrote a book called Inside the Head of a Collector: Neuropsychological Forces at Play. And Dr. Mueller is a neuroscientist who also is an avid collector. She says that there are 8 reasons that people might collect. One is rarity. There was an experiment done in which we found out that specific areas of the brain light up when we are presented with something unusual among a string of ordinary objects. Definitely when I was walking along the beach as a kid, seeing a really, really shiny shell or a blue shell when everything else is beige or cracked was really special to me. And or when a shell was completely intact, whereas all the other shells are broken apart. That was really cool to experience. A second reason would be for pride, such as the acquisition of exquisite or valuable objects that can get you recognition and admiration from others. Potentially, if I had a designer bag collection, I would definitely want to tell you about it so that I can get a little bit of admiration. A third reason would be the deals. Acquiring something at a modest price can add to the story and joy of possessing something for comparatively little money. So, designer bag collection? Oh no, I got every single one of them at a great steal, so it increases the value of my collection. The fourth reason could be for historical reasons, so such as your coin collection that's tied to your grandfather. There is something inherently human about tying ourselves to our past and the people who were living before us, and whether it's people who are related to us or people who have passed from a while ago. I saw a internet video the other day about somebody who just donated a bunch of stuff from their Elvis collection to a thrift store, and then the video taker was really excited about that and got an Elvis hairbrush. The legacy of somebody who was once alive, or even all the antique shops that you mentioned in downtown Orange. For a fifth reason, we got intellectual. I know one person that I interviewed said that they have a few tarot decks, which we'll get to more, but they don't consider themselves a tarot deck collector because they don't really know anything about that. But they do consider themselves a crystal collector because they're very informed, have done a lot of research on each of their stones and why each one is important to, spirituality and stuff. And so I think that's a really interesting reason to define who's a collector and who's not a collector. Like you said as well, like, do you use your board games at all, or do you just have them looking pretty? A sixth reason could be for social reasons. I think collecting board games would be a wonderful social reason to have that sort of collection. You get to have a non alcoholic, non electronic way to bond with people that you want to get close with. And through collecting something, you can also bond with other people who also collect those things too. Oh my gosh, you also have a wonderful collection of designer handbags, Drew. Let's talk about it. This is going to be awesome. He is nodding right now.
That sounds great. I would be happy to compare designer handbags.
Number seven would be arranging or rearranging. So this is the displaying of our collection and our organizational skills therein of our collection. And the last reason I thought was the most psychologically poignant was anticipation. So, when we anticipate a reward, we have a lot of activity in our brain that is helping us to pursue it or feel excited by it. And then, once we actually obtain our goal or obtain our reward, our brain chemistry dips a little bit in activity and then rises again once we anticipate the next reward. So that is probably the most universal reason that anybody collects anything.
Ooh, anticipation makes me think of crowdfunding. So, oh, okay. I'm kickstarting this item that is going to be available in a year and a half and get to sit in the anticipation of that for a long time. In fact, I know people who are involved with multiple Kickstarters or crowdfunding possibilities. And one thing I hear a lot is, I got a shipping notice and I'd completely forgotten I crowdfunded that. I'd completely forgotten I backed that. I don't know if you've heard that too.
Yeah, that's the reason that I don't really order anything that I know that I'm going to forget about. Because isn't it counterintuitive that they're funding that because of the anticipation of the reward, but once you forget about the anticipation, now what, you know?
Yeah. Is it just on to the next thing you crowdfunded? I know. It's a very, very interesting conundrum. Or if I've been looking for that choose your own adventure to complete my run from like 11 to 20 or something like that. And I get it. You're right. Then what? What becomes the next anticipation? Are human beings just wired this way? And I guess one question is, when do we stop? The idea of completedness is there. I think you mentioned that there are occasionally things where you can say, oh, okay, well, there was only a run of this many, say, books in this series, and I have them all. That is complete, and I don't have to worry about chasing any more.
Yeah, and that reminds me of Rick Riordan's books with the Percy Jackson
Oh,
series.
yeah.
I currently own the original five, but my first, the book one and book five are in hardcover, while my book two, three, and four are paperback. And that used to bother me because, well, I started with a hardcover, but now I have paperbacks and they're not super matching. And then he released part like the House of Olympus series too. And then I got the first two books in paperback, but the third book I read on a Nook, so that one was digital. And then I didn't end up. I think I had the fifth one of that in hardcover, and yeah, it felt like just a mess when you're not as perfect as the timeline of existence kind of could let you be. Like, if only I had committed to paperback or hardback like all at once, then it would be complete. But I don't know, and maybe it's just a way of encouraging consumerism and for people to buy things that they don't necessarily need, but just want in order to feel complete, you know?
Could very well be. Yeah. In fact, there are people in the board game community who would call themselves completionists. And that usually has to do with there's a base board game and then there are expansions to that board game. And so they want to keep going until they have found everything they possibly can. For example, the game Carcassonne. Do you play Carcassonne, Avery?
Nope.
Okay. So it's a game about creating, you have square tiles and you create a landscape and then you claim different parts of the landscape and that's how you score points. So Carcassonne has been around since 2000, 2001, and there have been many, many, many expansions and different, I guess you could say, flavors of the original game, the base game as well. And so some people do not stop until they have found every single thing that was ever made for Carcassonne. Is it doable? Yes, certainly. Is it easy? Not at all. And I think you're right. The question becomes not, are you actually playing with or enjoying these items? Is it the thrill of the chase that becomes, and the knowledge that you could potentially complete this at some point, that becomes really exciting.
Yeah. Drew, collecting is a much deeper topic than I initially thought it would be.
I totally agree.
And this month, to kind of learn more about it, we both interviewed different people that we knew who collected things of different kinds.
We sure did. Would you like to start with your first interview?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
I interviewed my sister Sarah, who collects tarot decks. So, tarot card reading is a form of cartomancy, or cards-based fortune telling or divination, where the practitioner uses tarot cards to gain insight into the past, present, or future. They formulate a question and then they draw cards to form interpretations of these answers. You've probably seen it in media of various kinds. Its deck has 78 cards, which is a bunch more in comparison to the 52 regular card deck. And this tarot deck has different cards like Major Arcana, which have cards such as Strength, Temperance, the Devil, the Tower, and kind of, dramatic names like that. And then the Minor Arcana, which are just basically four different suits and different numbers with a knight, queen, king, and a page. Yeah, and a page. Um, and tarot decks originated from at least medieval Europe, and they had the use of being card games or for divination. Nowadays, there are tons of tarot decks in publication and sold in stores all over the world, created by artists in all styles and themes you can imagine. I personally have a few. I think I have three or four. I have one that's animal themed. I have one that's tattoo art themed. I have one that's kind of like a fantasy animal deities themed. And I have another one that that is kind of it's almost like pop art in how kind of dramatic it looks. And there's tons of other themes too. There's any theme that you could think of, there's a tarot deck designed around that theme. And there are also oracle decks, which are a little bit different from tarot decks, but my sister also collects those as well. So she started tarot reading as a hobby in 2020 after collecting a few decks and meeting other friends who read and watched a lot of YouTubers and other publishers and artists. She really was in just and she really enjoyed the process of tarot reading, and that was kind of part of what inspired her to also collect more and more decks. The most that she's had at once has been 60, but nowadays she has about 40. She's been really vocal about making sure that she rehomes decks that she no longer feels attached to, because even when she had 60-ish, she would feel a little guilty for not using them all, or she wouldn't feel that much joy when she had some decks in her collection that she didn't really feel emotionally attached to. So that was a big thing for her in this collecting process, that she wanted to be able to look at the art in her tarot decks and, number one, be able to do a tarot reading from it, like be able to interpret the images in the cards, because there are some tarot decks, for example my tattoo art themed one, there's some tarot decks that it's kind of like the image. So say for example it's like the six of wands, it's just like six wands, and then the next card is like seven of wands, it's just like seven wands. But the ones that Sarah really likes are the ones that each card has a specific image related to the original theme of that card. So different artists can actually interpret the cards different ways as well too. But one deck might have the strength card look like a lion. Another deck might have it look like a horse. Another deck might have a, woman carrying a child. I don't know, like literally anything. And that's what Sarah loves so much about when she reads tarot cards, is because she gets to embark on a journey with the cards that she pulls right there. So there's a very specific taste that she has in her tarot cards. And this is a taste that can also change over time. For example, she used to enjoy simple, comforting decks. Like there are some decks that have, cute pandas or cute little home, like, cozy imagery. But now she really enjoys ones with more symbolism and detail. And like I said, being able to rehome her decks, which, just selling or gifting her decks to others, that also helps her express her taste over time as well. So she's allowed to grow and change during this collecting process. And it brings her a lot of joy to have a hobby that is really hers. When she talks about it with others, sure, everybody can have different opinions, but her feelings are really unique to her. And when she says that, she had a really interesting quote. She says, "When I was younger, I was discouraged from doing quote unquote silly or frivolous things and also buying unnecessary things. Having this collection of items that I enjoy, even if it isn't giving me Buddha level enlightenment, makes my home feel like home. It feels good knowing that there are artists and creators out there who can draw such great cards or write such great books, and I've supported them by buying their work." And that's another thing that she's really passionate about too, is supporting the work of artists, because a lot of these cards that she loves the most are designed by independent artists, and so she gets to support their work through her passion, and it's just a really pleasant, wonderful, lovely time all around. And during my discussion with her, she also brought up the interesting question that you also brought up earlier, is what really is the difference between consumerism, materialism, or hoarding, and what kind of collecting is truly justified. So like I said, she, used to feel a little bit guilty about how many that she had, because in reality, to do tarot reading, all you need is a tarot deck. So why do you need, so many? And so that was kind of a dilemma or mental question that she had to deal with, through whether or not it was okay for her to collect this object type. And tarot decks are often interpreted to be very spiritual and have a sacred purpose too. So, of course, there are people out there who would, be judgmental about somebody who has too many, how many, like you said, how many can you really use in a month or in a year? But she then realized, why was she inclined to think that a tarot deck collection is less ethical or moral than like a rock collection or a sticker collection? Like she interprets tarot cards as just, a book that she likes to read and study, and she can cycle through it whenever she feels done with them or when she's ready for a new one. And that's a very interesting perspective on that I know that other people probably don't share, which just makes her practice more unique.
That's great. And there is actually a way to sort of see what Sarah's up to.
Oh, absolutely. You can find Sarah's YouTube channel at Tangy Tarot. That's TANGYTAROT. She does a lot of YouTube videos around her tarot passion and her life.
That's great. Congratulations, Sarah, for reaching out and creating something that sort of shares with the world what's going on. That's wonderful. I love that. I love the democratization of people who are sharing their passions, and also, like Sarah was talking about, the democratization of making art through things like Etsy, for example. And the idea that you no longer have to be with a commercial entity in order to get your art into the hands of someone else. I think for years and years we've had things like artisans markets or places like that where somebody has a little stall and they're able to sell things when someone's actually on site. But Etsy and the others have been amazing at enhancing opportunities for that.
Yeah, I have so many art prints from independent artists that I haven't hung up yet that I feel so guilty about because they're are you looking around at all of yours in your
I'm
office?
looking at one of my posters right now from, I think this was from Redbubble, if
Oh
I'm
wow.
not mistaken. And it is a poster, and it is reflective of the saying about the tea ceremony in Japan, which is Ichigo Ichi-e, which roughly translates to one time or one chance, one meeting. And the reason that the idea is that the tea ceremony is created to have an experience that can never be repeated. And so it's special, it's valuable, it's personal, it is a gift. And the reason that I have this poster up, which has the Japanese characters and some cool colors that were created by an artist, is that I think of theater that way too. I think of theater as we do something that only lasts for one short period of time, but it changes everyone involved.
Wow.
So I kind of loved that. Okay, so I talked to a few people as well. The first person I talked to is my boss from my ghost tours and Haunted Orange County, Haunted OC. His name is Ernie, and Ernie is a Southern California resident and a Disney fan. And so he collects Disneyana and has found ways to display all of his collected artifacts in his home. And so I'll tell you a little bit about how he got started, and then I'll tell you kind of what his house looks like now. He started as a kid, he said. He loved going to the Disney parks, and he would buy things from the Disney park to decorate his room. And his love of Disneyland led to him wanting to create a little bit of Disneyland in his bedroom. So he would make displays on his nightstand or his table next to his bed, simply to hold on to a little bit of that experience of, as we all know, the happiest place on earth. And that kind of followed him for most of his life. And as he moved into houses and apartments on his own, he just started filling them. And nowadays, he only adds items if there is a strong connected emotion. If there's something that is unique that he does not have in some form elsewhere in his house. He says he's trying to save space, as most of his rooms are full of Disneyana at this point, and all of them are themed a little bit differently. He has, for example, a Haunted Mansion room. He has a room that has the old Skyway when you used to be able to go from Tomorrowland to Fantasyland and go through the Matterhorn back in the day. He has a
Ooh.
skyway going from one of his rooms to the other room. He has an Adventureland room. He has his backyard is New Orleans Square. And so every room, he says, makes him feel like he doesn't have to leave home to feel joy. He says, a mini version of a museum in his own home. And so I think Sarah said the same thing. They make these two collectors feel like this is their space. It's not a neutral space. It's not a space that is filled with IKEA furniture and that's the identity. It is a space that is filled with beauty, with art, with joy, with memories, and all of these things lead into why they continue. And he said he also has transitioned into having a couple of really interesting pieces that are, he described them as ephemera. So, ephemera, according to internet sources, ephemera are items that are not originally designed to be preserved and collected. So, they're things that were used for other purposes. For example, he has a couple of documents that are signed by Walt Disney or signed by the Disney board that were legal documents or financial documents, and now they simply serve as pieces of history that he has at home and that he can just kind of look back into the past. And there's something about being a signature of someone that you admire, right? A piece of paper that was held by Walt Disney. I remember when I went to Mexico City, I went to an abbey where the playwright and nun and all around amazing person Sor Juana Inez de la Cruz lived, and they had her rosary on display. So this was something that she literally wore back in the 1700s, and it moved through history and was there for me and all the people who came to visit to look at. Ephemera, right? It was originally just for her, it was her devotional object. And now just looking at it helps concretize the knowledge that she existed. And so you were talking about looking at things from our ancestors, like my grandfather's coins or other things, and even someone farther away or someone who's not associated with your family, you can kind of look back and say, that person lived. And that person lived, and that person signed a document, or had a rosary, or used this set of chopsticks, or whatever it is. So I kind of find that fascinating. And he also said that he does have friends and a community that are Disneyana collectors. One is building a museum in California and intends to open it to the public. And the other has essentially made a business out of his passion. And so he trades, he buys and sells, and that is how he kind of funds what he is continuing to do. So, in order to buy the next item, he will sell one of his items that, as you said, he wasn't really connected to anymore, like your Magic Treehouse books. So, if there's something that he feels he can let go, then there might be something new that he could bring in. So it was fascinating talking to Ernie, and it is always lovely to go and see his house and see everything that he has managed to curate around him.
That's really amazing. And that also reminds me of people who go to Broadway musicals and they wait for the cast to sign their playbook or playbill, their playbill, and they love to display those special, special playbills because the fact that somebody important related to it signed it, it just adds a lot of value to it mentally and financially.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also interviewed my colleague Josh, who collects Nintendo Amiibos. Do you know what Amiibos are?
I don't.
Nintendo Amiibos are toy figurines that can connect to your Nintendo game to unlock cosmetics or extras. So they're not like, they don't literally connect, but they're figurines. You put them near your Nintendo Switch or other Nintendo device, and then once you're in game, for example, if you're in Breath of the Wild, you can unlock some extra cool armor via that amiibo and also some Mii's in Mario Kart as well. So when Josh and his husband started dating 8 years ago, Josh only had three of his favorite Smash characters as amiibos. But 6 months in, tragedy struck. I'm just kidding now. I probably should not say that. 6 months in, they started collecting amiibos. And it was just kind of a thing that they started to do together. And now, 7.5 years later, they have two of their living room walls completely covered in a shelf at the top. So he expressed that he has 212 amiibos now, and they're missing or still looking for seven of them. And so the way that they displayed it in their current house is that above the windowsills in their living room, there's just like a shelf along the top that just has all of them, and it just covers those two top corners, and it's just you just see them the moment that you walk in. And he loves video games and also the hunt to look for the amiibos, as well as the online shopping and the antique shopping. It just was a good fit for what he and his husband just enjoy doing together. And every time they move to a different house, the first thing is right. All right, where are the amiibos going? And he also expressed that he's not super precious with them. Like when he has to pack them up, he just tosses them into a box. And they're also unboxed as well, the way that he started. So you know how I said like I started with paperback and then I it was hard to convert to hardcover. So he started with collecting his amiibos unboxed. So that just means that you take it out of the box, which is very specific because there's a very big line between collecting completely boxed figures versus uh, unboxing them, which is just I think a lot of toy collectors it's like that scene in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse? No, which one of those Spider-Man Spider-Verse ones where Gwen hops into Miles's room and then she sees his action figure and she's like, "Oh, it's still in the box." Rips it out and he just internally screams.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that's right.
I asked a few questions about like what does it mean to really unbox them or leave them in boxes, and so he also collects Barbies as of 10 years ago, but only three of his Barbies are still in the box, and they're the Marvel X-Men slash Barbie collaboration things, and they're very limited edition and very rare and unique. And Josh overall believes that toys are meant to be out of the box as a tactile object because he wants to touch and feel it because that's just like what toys are for in his opinion. But those three special limited edition Barbies that he kept, he opened one, he saw the certificate of authenticity, and then he was like, hmm, what if I ever want to resell this or, keep this pristine just in case? But I also asked him like, well, do you collect things to think about selling them later? And I'm sure there are people out there who do, but for him, he never has really any intention to sell anything. But he was like, in a dire, dire scenario, if he ever
Mhm.
needed to sell anything, he would sell those boxed, unopened Barbies. And his motivation for collecting is just to do it. Not necessarily to resell it, not necessarily to keep something in pristine condition. Although he does not let his nieces or nephews play with his amiibos when they come over, because he also believes, and he tells the children, some toys are just for looking at, some toys are not for playing with. And he gives them other options to play with. And he also keeps them high up and out of reach of the children. So, it helps deter them from their childish tendencies of like, ooh, toys are for playing, toys are for touching, toys are for chewing and throwing, and all whatever might happen. And another interesting thing he mentioned was the experience of collecting toys as a grown man. Since 10 years ago, collecting Barbies during his college times was just a different, environment where he would have to be prepared with the story while he was buying them. Like, oh, these are for my niece, they're not for me. But now he's grown a lot more comfortable with it, and the world has also grown a little bit more comfortable with it too. So he's content with just saying, yeah, these are for me. So what? Who cares? And I think that's a very, very valuable experience for him because he clearly gets a lot of enjoyment and also artistic joy out of it too, because he also makes and paints custom dolls as well. And so these toys and dolls are artifacts to him. They're artistic products and they're sculptures with the intent of being interacted with. And so it really ties into who he is as a person, and he was really happy to talk about his collection, and we had a really great discussion about you know why it's important to him and how it makes him feel. And he also said that nobody had asked him about it before, and I was really surprised because I always try to be very curious about people's interests and passions. And when I had the opportunity to interview him, I knew that I wanted to interview him because I didn't know anything about his collection or why he collected it. And the amount of the amount of connection that I was able to experience with him just by talking about his passion was a really wonderful part of this experience for me as well. And I'm really glad that I got to learn about it.
Oh, that's fantastic, Avery. I kind of love the idea that times have changed, and in a way, I think what we are allowed to collect has opened up. And looking at things that were previously seen as childlike, like Lego, for example, now there are all kinds of Lego sets that are pitched toward adult fans of Lego. People who used to be marginalized. Oh, are you still playing with Lego sets? How old are you? And Lego is appealing to these people as collectors. And sometimes the adult fans of Lego sets are specifically designed to sit on a shelf rather than be played with. Something like the Imperial Star Destroyer set, for example, that has a little plate that says Imperial Star Destroyer, and it's clearly meant to be on a shelf. Or my partner got me, I think for my birthday last year, the helmet from The Mandalorian. And it has a little plate that says The Mandalorian, and it's the helmet, and so it's designed to be built and displayed. And the idea that in some ways we are what we collect. And I think it's great that you could learn so much about Josh. Even if you hadn't had a chance to talk to him, you could have looked at what he collects and said, I understand. But then delving deep is pretty fantastic. My partner Rose, I talked to her about the slogan shirts that she likes to purchase. And I know a lot of people who love buying shirts that have slogans or sayings on them. And then that kind of serves as a shorthand when they meet people. Here's something about my identity. So Rose's, one of her favorite shirts says, sorry, I am very awkward, sorry, in big letters on her shirt. And then my friend Matthews has a shirt that says, you read my t-shirt, that's enough social interaction for one day. And I just kind of, again, we are what we collect, right? We are what we wear. We are what we display. And something that a way that you can individuate without having to say a word. And I was just thinking, as you were talking about Josh, I was thinking about going back into theater history and the play The Glass Menagerie. And the collection of glass animals that the main character Laura has. And they tell you so much about Laura. And this will be a spoiler for a play that's decades old now, but there is a gentleman caller, and he is the first person who has dated Laura for a long time, if ever. And she shows him one of her animals, and it is a crystal unicorn. And he accidentally drops it, and the horn snaps off of the unicorn. And so I think this is why the play is called The Glass Menagerie, right? Because a title always tells you here's what to look for in the play. And Laura is her glass menagerie. She is the glass animals. She is somebody who has been protected and kept away from society so that she will not be broken. And so I know a lot of people who collect crystal, or I know a lot of crystal figurines. I know a lot of people who collect ceramic figurines, like I think they're called Hummel figurines, I'm thinking, or all kinds of things that must be kept safe, just like Josh was talking about. Some things you look at, some things you play with, and figure those kinds of things that can break are fascinating to me. Even dolls, ceramic dolls. My mom has a doll from this maker called Madame Alexander, and it's, I guess, a very fancy doll that she was given when she was a little girl. And my grandmother, her mother, said, I want you to keep the doll in its box. You can look at it, but it's not to be played with. Just like Josh said about something decades later.
Wow, that's a good play. I haven't read it yet.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a play that has a lot to say.
Mm.
Um, Avery, I see that you interviewed some people about their board game collections too. If there's anything that you wanted to share from them.
Yeah, I asked a few people about their board game collections, and they had numbers ranging from 15 board games to 100 to 500.
Yeah,
I could
yeah.
not. I have you met people with more like that many board games?
I have. Yeah.
I was just blown away because growing up, it was just always natural for my family to have a board game collection because it was me and my two siblings, so naturally board games were a great thing for us to have at all times so that we could entertain ourselves. And so I, didn't realize that that was kind of considered our little collection. And then, yeah, just reading a bunch of people's responses about how they um, like to use it with their friends, how they're able to have some community on a regular basis, and people who've gone to Gen Con, which is a board game convention every year that I went to last year, actually. And I think that there's so much that can be said about a collection that gives you something more. Sure, I would have, a couple rocks, at home, but was I able to play with my rocks with other people for hours on end and then get to laugh and cry and think about, capitalism and, all sorts of exchange and the role play of it and all? I don't know. Yeah, it's just a very um, admirable style of collecting and interaction that can have a lot of value that is not attached to the physical pieces itself. And I think that's what makes play so important because I think the collection of board games is not about, oh, I have this box and I have some wooden pieces and plastic pieces in it, and there's like a little instruction manual and that's it. It's about what we as humans do with that item and what we create, the experience that we have amongst other people with those items that really makes the items valuable. But like we said, the never answered question of if you just collect hundreds of board games but don't play with them at all, or if you only play with certain ones more than others, then what is then is that still playful or is that more just, being materialistic?
Yeah, yeah, great questions. I think of board games. Do you remember the old thing in physics, Avery, with potential energy and kinetic energy? And potential energy is like a ball sitting on the top of the hill and it's not doing anything yet, but clearly it's going to if someone gives it a push. And then kinetic energy is the thing in action.
Yeah.
So I think of that with board games. Okay, here's my analogy. I know. Where is this metaphor coming from, Drew? My metaphor is this: when I look at board games or anything that is designed to be played with or read or enjoyed, so looking at movies or records or books, whatever it is, that thing is sitting on the shelf with potential energy. And I can look at a certain game and say, ah, I know when I'm going to have the right group of people to play this particular game. Or, oh, I remember when I played this game with this particular friend and we laughed and we laughed and we laughed, right? And so I call it the lure of the possible. And they're exciting in many ways because of, like we were talking about before, anticipation and their potential. And once you get them to the table and you're playing them and all that kinetic energy is going around, sure, sometimes it will sort of like live up to the hype, or it will perhaps be even more engrossing and exciting than you think. And sometimes, quite honestly, it will not. And you will think, I imagined this game being completely different than it turned out to be. So I just kind of think for a lot of board gamers, every single game in their collection represents a different possibility.
That's quite beautiful. It also reminds me of art supplies and all the people that I know, including myself, who collect art supplies as a form of potential energy. I never thought about it that way before. So thanks, Drew.
Hey, you got it. And I think we also wanted to talk about collecting the intangible as experiences.
Yeah, I think, like we mentioned before, traveling to different states and countries is a satisfying experience for those of us who care about completing. I don't even know what we're trying to complete. Like, are we all just gonna be worldwide explorers? But maybe we could. I don't know. I know escape room enthusiasts who make it their mission to play every escape room in the state or in the country, like running into people who have played hundreds and hundreds all over the country just makes I'm just surprised. It's quite I just want to know more. And I've also heard of people who do like a ton of cruises too, like those, when you go on a ship and like travel and stuff. And so I think people really find a lot of joy in the memories of it all. So this is like we were talking about materialism, but really collecting has it can have a whole other side to it too. Is but maybe it's still materialistic to travel to different countries just to travel to different countries. Like, my questions would be, well, are you connecting with the local population? Are you learning more about local communities? Are you staying in a nice hotel and then not really learning anything about the culture or the history? Those would be my questions in terms of how how legit is your travel experience, right? And that would probably be my opportunity to judge somebody on, well, sure, you're stepping foot in a lot of countries, but what really matters at the end of the day? Does it matter that you get to check off on a list that you've been to another country now and that you only have 10 left to visit? Or is it, well, I have only been to, 3 countries in my life, but each time I went, it was really meaningful, and the memories last me until now, and I'm satisfied with not going to every single country.
Yeah, that's a great question. The idea of globe trotting, and people literally say things like, "I've done Europe," right? Like you said, I checked it off my list. And I, of course, absolutely love travel and learning from travel and learning what people are like everywhere. And it is an honor to have the privilege to be able to visit different countries. There are certainly people who are there for the Instagram shot. And I have seen them. I have seen somebody who went on a boat tour in the Bahamas just to get two Instagram shots, one on a swing on a sandbar and one to hold up a green sea turtle and have someone take an Instagram photo of her holding the green sea turtle. This was not somebody that I knew, by the way. This was somebody that I was on that particular boat journey with. So I think these are questions worth asking. Like, what kind of experiences are you collecting, and how are you thinking about the idea of collection?
Yeah. And there's also another negative side to collecting of experiences because, and we did also mention earlier, people like to collect people back in the day
Yeah.
where people are treated as objects. And I've read, seen, heard hearsay of people who take pride in dating somebody of every race or multiple races as though they're collecting objects. And it is so icky when you are treating a living thing, sorry, a living person as a thing. And it's just icky. Ugh, blah, blah. Because then you can also go the other way of saying, like, oh, I've never dated an Asian before. Now I'm really gonna pursue you. Or, oh, I only date Asians. So either I'm interested or I'm not. Like, being able to treat people as collectible is just so disgusting. It is objectifying. It is dehumanizing. It's really inappropriate, and I completely stand against it. And cause sure, maybe people might start out harmless, like, oh, well, it's just a harmless observation, or it's just a preference. Like, I'm allowed to have preferences, aren't I? But aren't you're imposing expectations onto people of a certain group and continuing to, develop expectations onto those people just due to your past experiences or stereotypes. And there's so much there's so much just grossness that I'm just feeling right now just thinking about it.
Yeah, I hear it. And that's fascinating, the line between having preferences and being reductive or being objectifying. And yeah, Avery, I hear it. And it is around there in culture. It's around there in some things that only get spoken in certain groups of people, or in certain stories that are told. And it fits. I see why you thought about it in relation to collecting and sort of where where have we lost the idea of what play is and become someone who is acquiring, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's our lines between something that's playful and then something that's hurtful.
Yeah. Moving to, I suppose, happier territory, we can talk about maybe the idea of a digital collection.
Ah, yeah. In games like Mario Kart, you can collect trophies. That's fun. In Animal Crossing, I remember that you can collect every species of bug and fish on the island. I guess those are living things too, but they're digital. There's that difference. Yeah, you can collect all the fish and all the animals and donate it to a pretty museum on your Animal Crossing island, and you won't be harming any humans or actual living things in the process.
There you go.
And yeah, you can play Pokemon, where the catchphrase is literally to catch them all or collect them all. And they have new worlds for you to explore and creatures for you to discover and catch, and you get to chase down legendary Pokemon, and you have to do specific things to catch them or save your Master Ball to catch them. And that was a really big part of my childhood too, was just like playing video games where you would get to collect things. However, I was always okay with not getting 100%. Like there are people who want every single achievement and every single creature, but I'm not one of those people because then you have to do research. You have to look up how to get every single thing because not all of it's common knowledge. So I don't know. Are you a completionist or a 100%er when you play games?
Not necessarily. I mean, if it's easy, then yeah, but I don't lose sleep over it. And I remember,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, my Pokemon phase, watching the anime with my daughter, playing Pokemon Go, playing the Pokemon card game. That was a good run, Avery. I think that was like what, 3 years or something like that. And I remember specifically the cartoon explaining that Pokemon were happy in their Pokeballs. You remember that? So
Yeah.
even if they were stored, and I keep thinking like some of the characters, how often did they use that one Pokemon that would show up, I don't know, once a season or something like that. But I remember thinking, okay, they've taken great pains to show that these little pocket monsters are just absolutely fine curled up in their little Pokeballs.
Absolutely. Nothing to worry
Yeah.
about there.
Nothing to worry about. And I think that this is part of a kind of greater thing with digital stuff about keeping people invested by providing stars or coins or anything. You talked about rarity earlier, and the for a long time, Magic the Gathering, a rabbit hole that I went down for a few years, had this idea of something, a piece of cardboard, because you believed that it was worth more than it was worth more. And rarity was a part of that. So yeah, all kinds of digital games have kind of taken up that banner and said, okay, well, we'll give you a really rare piece of this puzzle, and if you collect all the pieces, then you'll get a reward. So digital, I mean literally, does not exist except as a bunch of pixels, but it is an object that is, I suppose, tangible in some way, even though it's not tangible like a stuffy.
Well, this has been a great discussion, Drew. Are you satisfied with all of the thoughts that we have collected together about collecting?
I think we have curated an amazing collection of thoughts, and I did find one quote to go out with. And it's a little bit of a longer quote, but I really liked it. So, this is by an author named Randy Frost, and it's from a book called Stuff: Compulsive Hoarding and the Meaning of Things. So, here we go. He says, this has led some scholars to suggest that collecting is a way of managing fears about death by creating a form of immortality. This is consistent with a popular theory in social psychology called the Terror Management Theory, or TMT. TMT grows out of an existential predicament that people, like animals, are mortal. But unlike animals, we are aware of our own mortality. Knowledge of the inevitability of death and its unpredictability can produce paralyzing fear. To cope with this potential terror, cultures provide beliefs, rituals, and sanctioned strategies for managing it. One of these strategies is the belief that some part of ourselves can live on after we die. Producing or amassing something of value is one way to accomplish this. Thus, a collection offers the potential for immortality.
That's a real wonderful doozy of a quote. especially with the way that plastic lasts absolutely forever in our
Yeah.
world. That's another thing that Josh brought up too, is his question was just, these are just pieces of plastic. Why do I care so much? And what's in it for me? And
Because we are what we collect. And I'm sure our Buddhist sides, our Buddhist sensibilities would say, but every day of your life, recognize that you have the possibility of having those collections taken away from you. I know people who have lost collections in floods or fires, and the loss of self that happens with that, I think, is a very Western thing. And so maybe it's worth looking at this from two different angles. One angle is Frost's quote, the idea of control or collecting as identity construction or curation of self and the potential for immortality. I mean, look, my grandfather's coin collection literally lived after him, right? And I have it now. And so is that touching immortality? I suppose so. But never forgetting that the Buddhist side of ourselves or of culture would say we are not those things. And we cannot depend on those things for our joy, because ultimately it's not about the things, it's about our humanity and our connection with what's come before and after.
thank you so much for this wonderful discussion today, Drew.
Thanks, Avery, and I'll see you next month.
This has been Powered by Play with Avery and Drew. If you've been enjoying this podcast, you can support us online at Ko-fi. That is ko-fi.com/poweredbyplay. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.